Welcome to Mental Health Monday. My name is Mick Coyle. Coming up on the programme this week.
It might sound dramatic, but eventually we will overwhelm our National Health Service.
It's got to be targeted, hasn't it? The right way to have that conversation. If you sit your child down with a clipboard and say, right, we're going to talk about your mental health now, they're probably not going to engage.
But these things build and build and build and build and build and become something big that suddenly needs a medical professional to deal with. But if you deal with them when they're small, then they never get there.
And I'll be reminding you how you can make connections with mental health organisations within your community. It's Mental Health Monday.
The home of the UK's conversation about mental health. Welcome to Mental Health Monday. Thank you for your time. As ever, it's a pleasure to have you with us for the podcast. Thank you as well for everyone who supported our sister podcast, Football Untold. I was absolutely delighted to be at the ARIAs, the big awards do. It's like the BAFTAs of the radio world, representing Football Untold in the week just gone. And yeah, it was a real pleasure to be nominated and shortlisted for the impact that Football Untold had. So thank you to everybody who supported that. The Football Untold podcast, which featured football players sharing their stories of problem gambling and had a really big impact with those people who heard it. And you can find out why by listening to the podcast. It's on a separate feed to Mental Health Monday. You can find it on footballuntold.co.uk or simply download Football Untold where you get your podcasts. It was a cracking series and great to get that industry recognition. Now we're going to crack on with the conversation for Mental Health Awareness Week. Now, obviously, there's a lot of young people out there who are growing up into this world where we can talk more openly about mental health. But there's a sticking point, isn't there, whereby if you as a young person come up against an adult who still is stuck in the past about talking about mental health, doesn't know, through no fault of their own, how to have those conversations, that can be particularly difficult. So I'm always keen to flag, and I've done it a few times already so far this year, opportunities for adults and for parents to learn some new skills about talking about mental health and how to do so. One of them has been launched for Mental Health Awareness Week, which runs from the 13th to the 19th of May, which is this new digital program which sort of combines animation but also education. And it's called Embers the Dragon. Now, what it's about, it's for children who are between the ages of, say, 3 and 7, not just to watch on their own, but to watch as a family. So you sit alongside your child while they watch an episode of Embers the Dragon, and then it then throws up activities that then give you the powers, give you the wording, give you the knowledge to have that conversation about thoughts, feelings, and how as a child you're able to articulate it. Most importantly, why that's important as well. Plus, it's a cracking animated series as well. Now, one of the stars of the show is the CBBC presenter Nigel Clarke, and Nigel's a dad in his own regard. So he joins us on the podcast this week for a quick chat about what Embers the Dragon's all about, but most importantly, why it's important that we teach parents how to talk to children about their mental health. Now, I've said this many times on the podcast before that what I do is I talk to my children about what are their marks out of 10 today. What are those thoughts and feelings that they've got on a scale of 1 to 10? If it's a 7, what can we do to make it an 8? If it's an 8, how can we make it a 9? If it's an 8, what are those great things that we can introduce if you're feeling like a 3 or a 4? And if it feels like a 3 or a 4, and it constantly feels like a 3 or 4, maybe that's something that we need to take some action on. So that's what I do. And I had the conversation with Nigel about the benefits of having these sorts of conversations with your children and what you can do to help make a difference in your children's lives, because they're growing up in a really difficult world and a different world to the one we grew up in. And as Nigel points out, that's why it's important to have these conversations with a new generation.
This is the first time we're doing this because for me as a parent and for older generations, we didn't have these conversations surrounding mental health with our parents. But now we know that it's so beneficial to be making our children aware of their mental health and giving them the tools to manage them as they grow older and to sort of understand the emotional literacy that surrounds it all.
Is the first part of this actually to say, you know what? I don't know what to say. I don't know what that conversation looks like. I don't know the steps to take, because by saying that out loud, you give yourself permission to then find out, to learn, to educate yourself.
Definitely. It's one of those things. Once you admit that, like, hold on, maybe I haven't got the tools here and I don't know what I'm doing, then at least you can start to research, where am I going to get the tools, or who can I talk to about learning what to do and learning what to look out for and learning how to talk to my child about this. Yeah, definitely that is a starting place.
So I've got a 5-year-old and a 9-year-old,
Yeah.
and you can tell they're very much in the sponge stage, which is basically they absorb absolutely everything, and they're not yet that stage where they're sort of angrily kicking back at the world. But that's it. For me, I try and embed that mental health conversation into the normality of everyday life right from the off. And I know that, speaking yourself as a dad, something, if you're aware of it, you try and normalize it so that when they do need to have that conversation, they already have a little bit of the language built in that helps them.
Definitely. And we're talking about, we should be doing this from even younger than your 5-year-old. From like 2, 3, 4, we should be having talks with our children. Not necessarily that complicated. It could be just referring to, I don't know, emoji signs and saying, oh, this is the sign for happiness. How are you feeling? Are you feeling happy right now? Are you feeling sad? But giving them the language, like you say, and introducing them to things so that they can refer back to them later on is key, so that they can build up this language.
Some of the stats around this, Nigel, are half of 3 to 7-year-olds are facing some kind of emotional health problems. Around about half of parents are worried about managing certain behaviors as well. 46% are talking about anxiety. So, I mean, this isn't just like, oh, what if this comes up? This is going to be a pretty much a lived experience for most parents, right?
Yeah, it's happening now, and there are so many different factors that have sort of led to this, but one of the biggest, you'd have to say, would be the pandemic and COVID only 4 years ago, which we're not going to know how that's affecting us. But if we look at these numbers, we can definitely say, hey, these might be going up because of what's just happened, because so much of that time was spent at home, not interacting with people, worrying about things, not knowing the way the world was changing around us. So as parents, we were having things going on in our minds. So we've got to only assume that these things have been thought about by our children as well, or passed down to them.
And I know that that's something that teachers are talking about now, that they just kind of think, well, maybe just this is what kids are like now, because they've had that experience and there was that time away. It wasn't just the time out of school, was it? It was the time not being able to go and see grandma. It was the time not being able to go and play in the park. It was all that stuff, which you kind of class as a parent, I think, is the nice things to do. But you kind of realize after the event, don't you, that all that stuff's crucial to them, almost understanding their place in the world, their environment, the places and things that are around them.
Definitely. It's definitely going to have had an effect. And looking at it, we have to be as honest as we can and say, right, well, these things have happened, and now we need to pick up the pieces and be aware that we have to move forward in a way that is going to help our children. And the other point that you mentioned there about beforehand and previously, whether there were mental health problems then, I think it's always been this way. Doesn't matter whether we've had a pandemic, doesn't matter whether we've had a cost of living crisis or financial, over the past 100 years, our children, us even, I should say, we have had mental health things to deal with, issues to deal with. I just think we're talking about it more now and we're paying more attention to it now. Maybe before we were ignoring it and pushing it aside and sweeping it under the carpet.
We're having this conversation, obviously, with the mental health banner. Do you use the phrase mental health when you're speaking to young people? You mentioned their thoughts, feelings, emojis. Emojis is, it's got to be targeted, hasn't it? The right way to have that conversation. If you sit your child down with a clipboard and say, right, we're going to talk about your mental health now, they're probably not going to engage with it. That might be something CBBC could do maybe as a spin-off show.
Yeah, it's always got to be age appropriate, which is why Embers the Dragon has kind of been developed, because the way it's pitched, it's not, oh, we're going to talk to you about mental health. It's just, we're going to talk to you about this, about feeling happy one day, or we're going to talk to you about what it might feel like when you feel a bit lonely, or whatever it is. It's brought to the children at a level that they understand and at a level that they can engage with and then talk about with their parents, with their teachers, with their grandparents, with their nieces and with their cousins, with their uncles and aunties, whoever it is.
How important is it that it's not just a and I know that parents do this. They stick them in front of an iPad and they go, "Oh, look, there you go, Embers the Dragon. Watch that." Then that's that taken care of. You've hinted at something else there, that there's got to be a follow up to that. There's got to be almost a watching it together, understanding it together, and maybe then talking about what that episode did, how it made them feel. That's the homework you've got to do around this, right?
Yeah, I mean, me working in children's entertainment, I think this should be the way that we as parents should be with everything, but specifically with everything surrounding TV and our kids watching YouTube or whatever they're watching. I think we should always be engaged with it and talking to our children about it. But this Embers the Dragon in particular has been designed so that there are support materials given to parents that they can then talk to their children about the episode that they've watched. There's a whole integration that happens and a whole parenting course that happens alongside your children watching the programs, which feed into each other and hopefully get the right conversations start happening and get us interacting with our children in the right way for it to be what it is an early intervention to identify things before they happen. And with that said, with us identifying things before they happen, it means it's not aimed just at people that might be having mental health problems. It's aimed at everyone. It's aimed at anyone because it gives you that language, that emotional literacy that hopefully means we'll see things in anyone and we'll be able to help each other.
You're Mr. Koala in Embers the Dragon. Great role. Now, let me tell you this. Let me ask you this, though. From a parenting point of view, can you give us an example of an occasion in your house where you can maybe look back at that and go, oh, I needed a Mr. Koala. I needed Mr. Koala then. I needed an Embers the Dragon session then. Things that maybe spring out as like, when emotions were high and you maybe felt you maybe weren't fully equipped to deal with it.
Yeah, I mean, more than before. I'm going through it now. So I've got a toddler who's coming up on 2 years old, and he is, let's say, not as vocal because he's got lots of people around. He just points at things and does things. So his meltdown, he's right at meltdown phase where if he can't explain something to me, he'll have a meltdown. So being aware of that and talking to him about it, even though he's not talking back to me about it, is really important. And I have to learn how to navigate that and be working in this sort of sector in the early years. I have tools, but even having tools, I have to look at other things because every child is different. So we all have to do it.
Obviously, working where you do in the job that you've got as well, you'll understand as well that what you put your child in front of is really important. I think sometimes parents, and I've seen it happen, you go into a cafe and sort of parent hands out the iPads and it's just like, oh, they just do their thing. There's a time for that, isn't there? Where sometimes there's a distraction technique, but also there's that engagement, which I think if we're going to talk about children's emotional development, if they constantly allow themselves to drift off into a world that doesn't really exist and doesn't base itself in community within society, that's potentially going to cause problems in the future, because then the child doesn't quite know how to respond if somebody comes to take their order, or doesn't know how to respond if somebody from a next door neighbor knocks on the door, because they're not in that space. We've got to get that balance right, haven't we? It feels like, I don't know, I sometimes feel like it's tipping too far in the other direction. It's tipping too far into it's a digital world, so let's just all live in a digital world. And we've got to get that balance right but we're real life human beings who almost have this like need to also be able to talk to people, communicate people, find our place within a town, city, wherever it is that we're growing up.
The key word that you've said there that is massively important is balance. And the other word that goes with that word is moderation. I think if you do anything, if you eat all day long, problem. If you watch the screen all day long, problem. If you play games all day long, problem. Anything that we do, if we do it to excess, is going to be a problem. Anything that you might exercise too much. If you exercise 24 hours a day, it's going to be a problem at some point. Your bones are going to crumble under the pressure or the strain. So it's about finding the balance and knowing that, hold on, this in moderation will be good, will be helpful, but I need to also do this in moderation, and I also need to do this in moderation to give our children that well-rounded presentation of the world, and that it's not all about one thing.
For parents who are listening to this who are thinking, you know what, I've never had this conversation or I've never looked into it, what are those first steps that you would recommend?
I would recommend massively, and it's not just because I'm working on it, taking a look at Embers the Dragon, because it's a very nice introduction to it, and it's not too highbrow medical, or it's very simple, and anyone can kind of have a nice introduction to it and not feel out of their depth, or like this is a bit complicated, or I'm not going to know how to do this. It's a real, and coupling that with the fact that you've got materials to use makes it really ideal for this kind of thing.
And what, Nigel, is the key question? What's at stake, do you think? If we don't get this right, if those 49% of parents who are worried continue to be worried, and actually those behaviours do become problematic, what for you is at stake? When you have the conversation with your toddler and you're thinking, fine, I'll deal with this situation. But if you just walked away and didn't deal with it, what for you are the things that might lay down the role, both for you as a parent, but also for your children?
It might sound dramatic, but eventually we will overwhelm our National Health Service, because so many people will be needing to be referred to doctors, therapists, psychologists, psychiatrists, to have treatment for things that shouldn't have got to that level, because they weren't addressed when they were just small problems, when they were just a little worry about attachment to their parent, or about being lonely, or worried about, oh, is mummy coming home from work? It starts with tiny things, but these things build and build and build and build and build and become something big that suddenly needs a medical professional to deal with. But if you deal with them when they're small, then they never get there. So it sounds dramatic, but yeah, that if we don't start addressing it now, that's what we're looking at. We're looking at overwhelming our National Health Service and it becoming a crisis.
And it's worth pointing out, actually, some of the team behind Embers the Dragon are sort of NHS trained. So it's not just people trying to do the right thing, it's people who actually understand the need to do the right thing.
This is the whole thing is based on clinical information, on systems that have been in place for years and years that parents have access to, but sometimes going through the NHS to get this information takes a long time and a lot of referrals. So making it more accessible and just having it there for parents to have the access to is really, really going to help. Yeah, and like you say, it's clinically tested and everything.
Brilliant. Nigel, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate you joining us. And I'm sure many people will take your advice as well. We'll put links to Embers the Dragon as well in the podcast notes so people can check that out too. And thanks for joining us on the conversation.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I hope you've enjoyed this week's podcast. Thanks for checking out Mental Health Monday. My name is Mick Coyle. You can find me on Twitter at Mr. Mick Coyle. You can also find me, Mick Coyle, on Facebook as well. Don't forget, if you want to speak to somebody about your mental health, you can do so. The Samaritans, free to call on 116 123. You can find mental health services where you are. Just look for the Hub of Hope. Type in your postcode. It'll find those mental health services close to you. And for support in a crisis, you can text SHOUT to 85258. That's if you're experiencing a personal crisis, you're unable to cope and need support. Shout to 85258. That's a text line. Do get involved in those services. In an absolute emergency, always remember the number to call is 999. Thanks for downloading the podcast this week. We'll be back next week with more Mental Health Monday. I hope you've enjoyed this week's podcast. Thanks for checking out Mental Health Monday. My name is Mick Coyle. You can find me on Twitter at Mr. Mick Coyle. You can also find me, Mick Coyle, on Facebook as well. Don't forget, if you want to speak to somebody about your mental health, you can do so. The Samaritans, free to call on 116 123. You can find mental health services where you are. Just look for the Hub of Hope. Type in your postcode. It'll find those mental health services close to you. And for support in a crisis, you can text SHOUT to 85258. That's if you're experiencing a personal crisis, you're unable to cope and need support. Shout to 85258. That's a text line. Do get involved in those services. In an absolute emergency, always remember the number to call is 999. Thanks for downloading the podcast this week. We'll be back next week with more Mental Health Monday.